Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. So as Matt said, this is essentially debut for brand new research that we are putting out and sharing with the advisor community around advisor productivity. This is part of a series of 4 studies that we do on the Kitces.com platform on a rotating basis. We do one that goes through advisor technology and what firms are using in their practices. We do one on marketing and how firms are building. We do one on advisor well-being and what's actually associated with advisors that are happy and sticking around with their firms. And then we do one on productivity, trying to really delve into everything from team structures to pricing to client service models, how it is that firms are trying to scale up their productivity. So my goal with you today is to share some of the new research that we found, some of the results that we found, including some things that are at least a little bit different than what I certainly see in the industry about what's kind of the recommended status quo around productive advisor teams. To kick this off, though, I want to start. We're gonna be a little bit interactive today. So this is you don't have to put your phones away. This is a take your phones out kind of session. So the first question just I want to ask for everyone is, what does it mean to you when I say an advisor is productive? What does productivity actually mean to you? So you've got a opportunity here to participate for yourselves. This is all anonymized. I'm not collecting personal data on anyone. How do you measure or define productivity for yourself? So we've got a code up on the screen. You can either go to slido.com and enter the code, which is FP Citywide 25 in the lower left there. If you are QR code inclined, you can just scan the little QR code. And assuming technology is working with us this morning, fingers crossed, you should get a prompt up where you can share out. When I say productivity, what do you think of? How do you measure? How do you evaluate that? Yes, sir. Ooh, growing assets while taking 100 free days a year. Feels pretty productive, getting a lot of leverage out of the time that we're spending. And so I can see a number of comments kind of coming into that end. Efficiency is our leading one so far. Ideally, answer your own before you look at everybody else's. We're not trying to aggregate together. This is just genuinely curious. How do we think about productivity as advisory firms? How do you measure productivity? Efficiency, revenue. I see a couple different revenue-related things. Time management, time off, my friends. We have a lot of compatriots on that one. Efficient use of time. You can kind of see the theme here. Time and revenue, which kind of blend together into an efficiency metric, into an efficiency outcome. So the way that we evaluate this for our research really is kind of a combination of these two. The core metric that we use, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about in the next half an hour or so, is a metric of revenue per advisor. So just in the aggregate, how much revenue is the typical advisor responsible for in your firm? Right? In the simplest sense, we can just take gross revenue, divide by the head count of people who are advisors, and we get to an approximation of this number. It's a very interesting number to look at from a productivity perspective because it's remarkably business model agnostic. Right? I don't necessarily care. Look, you could work with 200 clients who are mass affluent. You could work with 10 bajillionaire family office clients. You could work hourly. You could work AUM. All of it at the end of the day, you're going to sit across some clients for a certain number of hours a year. They're going to pay you, and we're going to find out what that was worth in the marketplace for the services that you're providing and how efficiently you can deliver them and how many clients you can do that before you run out of time. So one of the reasons why we spend a lot of time looking at revenue per advisor as a core productivity metric is it makes it quite easy actually to compare even across firms, across business models, across different types of clientele. Because ideally, if we're serving consistently, right, if my efficient unit of time is the same, it shouldn't really matter whether I work with a small number of big clients or a big number of small clients, whether I charge the fee this way, whether I charge the fee that way. At the end of the day, we all have the same number of working hours in the year to show up and deliver financial planning for clients and get compensated for it. And so the numbers should, and what we do find is they do equalize with some asterisks that we're going to talk about. So now I'll put this question back to you. Now that you kind of have that as a framework, where is your revenue per advisor? So as we define it here, I'm talking revenue per lead advisor who has some kind of client service relationship responsibility. So I'm not necessarily talking about like the paraplanners in your office, but if you take gross revenue of your firm and divide by how many people have client relationships that they're responsible for, you divide B and A, you should get a number. Where does your revenue per advisor number actually come in for your firm? So I see numbers coming in. We have a pretty wide range, not entirely surprised. It is striking to me, though, right? We're all nominally running the same kinds of investment management, financial planning, wealth management style businesses where we show up and serve clients and they compensate us for the time that we spend with them. Yet, as you can see here already, there are actually some pretty wildly different results in how much revenue different advisors can generate with the exact same roughly 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year that we work. And this, in essence, is why we do a lot of the productivity research that we do. Because to me, just as a nerd of business, this is completely fascinating that some of us in the audience literally generate 3 times as revenue as others, and we all have the exact same number of working hours. Right? Some of us are doing things very differently than others, that we can get more than 3x differences in revenue productivity when we're all in nominally the same business serving clients. So as we try to look at what we find in our research is associated with higher productivity, the first overwhelming, utterly dominating factor is not being alone. Is having at least one person to whom you can delegate generally administrative and support-oriented tasks. So the numbers that you're looking at here are revenue productivity of advisors from basically like the 10% worst to the 10% best and everybody in between. And we segment them out into firms that run on their own that have no staff support. Call these like the pure solos. We label them unsupported solos here. Firms that are on their own, but they do have some kind of team infrastructure around them. And firms that run an ensemble style model. So multiple advisors in teams with shared clients of the firm. And you'll notice that overall the numbers are not significantly different between what advisors get in supported solo structures and what they get in ensemble firms. We actually find this quite consistently in our research. There's not like a magic lift in profitability and productivity when advisors go into a multi-advisor ensemble firms, primarily driven by the fact that you still at the end of the day just need more advisors. And so yay, we're twice as big, but there are twice as many of us, which means our actual revenue productivity is the same. You size up often with ensembles, but you don't necessarily scale up from a revenue productivity perspective. But having anyone to delegate to is an utterly massive difference. The best advisors we can find who are pure solos top out at 1/3 of the revenue of those who build teams around them. The top advisors who are pure solos still top out at 1/3 of the revenue of advisors who build teams around them. Now, obviously, there's a point early on where I'm just not big enough and don't have enough revenue to invest into team. I have to grow to a certain point to be able to hire a team. But when you get to that point, if you choose not to hire, it significantly, drastically caps the upside of the business. So on the one hand, this becomes a big deal for those of us who are running solo practices. On the others, this becomes a dynamic for a lot of larger firms that are trying to figure out whether or how much support, staff support they should give their advisors versus letting their advisors walk on their own, versus if you're a platform that makes more money when your advisors make more money, how worthwhile is it for you to invest into staff in order to support them because you can actually triple their upside? And if you're a platform that gets a percentage of that, that goes very well for you as well. As advisors, we need staff infrastructure. There's just a lot of stuff that is delegable that gets very constrained when we don't delegate. And I highlight this in part as well because If I look at most of the general industry dialogue out there around what's the single biggest lift to free up advisors' time, most of us have the same answer. It's technology. We have never seen any piece of technology that lifts advisors' revenue productivity by 300%. Not even vaguely slightly close. In fact, what we find consistently in our research is that the other dynamics around team structure and leverage just completely crush the impact of technology. And I say that with love as someone that has a technology company. Like, I'm not anti-technology, but the reality, if you look at large-scale businesses, for companies that are really, really good at using technology, get like a few percentage points of margin out of the technology, like, congratulations, you run at 34% margins instead of 31% margins because you're a highly efficient use of tech across the entire firm. Now, if you're a large-scaled enterprise, 3 percentage points of margin is like $1 zillion. That drops down to the bottom line. So it's not that the tech is a bad ROI, but it doesn't lift you 300% revenue productivity. It lifts you like 3 points. Getting team structures right trumps tech. Again, no offense to my tech friends. Like, this is just what we find in the hard data. It's not even close. The effect sizes of team structures are that dramatically more impactful. Now, what we find, though, is as advisory firms start building teams, teams only really give a lift up to a point. As we go from kind of a pure solo on the left, one full-time equivalent of just you, up to 2, up to 3, you can see the revenue productivity lifts that come across the whole industry. And then once we get bigger than about 3-person teams, it kind of starts to level off. Now, just for context here, this is the service team that the advisor is working with to deliver services to clients. So I'm not talking about like how many people are in the firm in the aggregate, because that can be many more people with all the back office support that happens. But when you think about, like, if a lead advisor that says my team, the people on my team, the traders and portfolio managers and client service and associate advisors and paraplanners, like that core service team unit, the segment of people who serve that base of clients that they are assigned to, that's the service team unit that we were measuring, where we find these very significant lifts in productivity as we go from 1 to 2 to 3 team members, and then a relative flattening beyond that. So being the nerds that we are, we can't find results like this and not start saying, like, well, there's got to be something more here. We have to dig deeper into it. And so we did. And so what we started to do then is segment these teams into a little bit more of a nuanced manner. So there's a lot going on this chart. So let me explain a little bit of what you're seeing here. We're still looking at the same team sizes from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 full-time team members. That's kind of across the bottom here. But we break up the composition of the teams into how many people are in some kind of lead position with client responsibility. So lead advisor, senior advisor, service advisor, wealth advisor, like we all have different names for them. Like a person to whom clients is like assigned with their name at the top of the client's record in the CRM database, like that person. And then everybody else who supports the team. Client service administrator, paraplanner, associate advisor, like anyone else that supports that team for its productivity, but does not have I'm responsible for client relationships level duties. Right? If it's not a person you call to say what happened, the client fired us, they don't count in the advisor ratio, they count in the bottom half. So we break teams up that way, and then you kind of get these combinations now. So I can be a 1+2 team, which means I have 1 lead and 2 support. I could also be a 2+1, 2 lead advisors sharing clients with 1 support that feeds up to them. So we broke out all the different compositions of teams that had any material showing. I mean, there's a few that just don't happen in practice. No one really has like 4 lead advisors with no one supporting them, but we do see some 3+1 teams. So we break out all the different team structures. So now what you're looking at on the chart itself, the dark blue bars is the same revenue per advisor productivity that we've been talking about, but now we actually break it out by each individual team size and structure. So not just how many are on the team, but the composition of the team. The lighter blue bars then are the total revenue that that team manages. Make sense? So dark blue bars, revenue per advisor. light blue bar is just the total revenue that team manages. So not surprisingly, as you move all the way out to the right, like you get a team with 5-person team with 3 lead advisors and 2 support team. They just manage a lot more revenue, right? So it's the tallest light blue bar on the chart. The problem, though, is if I compare that 5-person team to a 3-person team in the middle, that's just 1 lead advisor plus 2. The 5-person team manages double the revenue of the 3-person team, but they have 3x the advisors to do it. So 3 times as many advisors for twice as much revenue, not a good trade-off. So total revenue is higher, but revenue per advisor actually drops down as the team sizes get larger. And in fact, what we found as we look at this, kind of reiterating a version of the earlier results, is that there is a surprisingly optimal balancing point for a good old-fashioned 3-person team. We couldn't find anything that beats a simple 1+2 team structure, which is senior advisor, associate advisor, client service administrator. We've all got different titles for exactly those functions, but something to that effect. So someone that can do all of the administrative and paperworky related tasks, that's our client service administrator role, and someone that can support on the actual client relationship-y stuff. Be in the meeting prep, meeting follow-up, planning analyses, check out the portfolio, validate how much they've gotten capital gains, like all those things where it's not a purely administrative task. You need some advisor knowledge, but you're not necessarily responsible for clients. At the end of the day, like they're my clients. It's my deal if they fire us. But I need someone that actually has planning and advisor knowledge. And that, pardon me, that 3-person team was the strongest of productivity that anything we could find across our research. Now, this was striking to us. I know one of the popular structures out there these days are 4-person teams, right? Angie Herber's kind of dubbed them diamond teams. Like we've got a lead advisor, 2 service advisors supporting them, and like a support person feeding up to all of them. So what we found around those larger team structures, 4-person teams in particular with multiple lead advisors, so having multiple lead advisors is really effective to free up the senior person's time. Right, in just the simplest sense, like other people can take over the client relationships. You as the senior advisor at the top of the team have more time and capacity. In the ideal perspective, that leaves the senior advisor more time to go out to do business development and grow the team. In practice, what we found is the average senior advisor at the top of that team takes Fridays off. They just work 4-day weeks instead of 5-day weeks, which means the aggregate productivity of the team drops down. Now, if you want to make the trade-off as the firm owner to say, right, per my friend earlier, if you want to say, no, my deliberate goal is to work fewer hours, push team tasks down, I'm making enough money to make the math work, I'm quite happy to trade a little bit of profitability for more time to delegate out so that I can take more days off, like more power to you. When we're running our individual firms, we get to make that decision for ourselves. But it is an outright trade-off. So when we run our own firms, we can decide whether we want to make that trade-off. For larger firms that are scaling up, this becomes a really big deal because a lot of the time the goal of the firm was to build more team around the senior advisor to free up their time, and it turns out more often they free up their time to take time off than free up their time to do more business development. In part for the exact same reason as my friend here, which is I already make pretty darn good money as the senior advisor on this team. Like getting 3 more clients on top of the 172 that my 4-person team manages with a couple $1 million of revenue is not going to change my life. What will change my life is spending more time with my kids and taking time off. And so I think to some extent there's just kind of a human aspect of this that when we get to a certain level of income and revenue productivity where the take home is what we need in order to make our goals work, priorities start to change. And so every now and then there's a senior advisor at the top of a larger team that says, like, we're driving forward and we're growing this thing to the moon, and everyone's coming along with me to create capacity because I'm bringing clients as fast as I can, hand them off as fast as I can. And if you do that, these multi-advisor lead structures work great because you need to be able to hand off a steady flow of new clients that you're bringing in and developing. Most of us, though, don't actually have that volume of new client business development coming in. And when we don't see any productivity lifts out of team structures that get more lead advisors. Now, the added complication to this is that when we get down to these, as I kind of frame them like leaner teams, the second way that we can measure productivity of a team, aside from just the revenue per lead advisor, is just the revenue per team member, of team members in total. Where you just take, right, I got $2 million of revenue, there's 5 people on this team, I can divide B into A, and I get about $400,000 of revenue per team members, which is what we see in 3+2 teams that I mentioned earlier. So now you can see revenue per team member productivity, which gets you to some similar places that we saw earlier. There's kind of 3 peaks that show up on this chart. 3 lead advisors that are just all out there serving clients, 1+2 teams, and 3+2 teams. So like 3 lead advisors with 2 support team behind them. Now the good news, air quotes, they all have relatively similar revenue per team member. So at the end of the day, these various groups, whether you're 3 or 5 people, they're all managing to generate about $400,000 of revenue per team member. The problem, though, is some of these team members are significantly more expensive than others. Right? Lead advisors require significantly higher compensation than client service administrators and paraplanners and associate advisors. And so when we recognize that the cost structure is different, we kind of get back to the same place, which is if I can choose a team that's going to have $400,000 of revenue per employee productivity, I now get a choice. Do you want to, how many lead advisors do you want to do that with, and how many support staff do you want to do that with? From a business efficiency perspective, the answer is pretty simple. You want as few people at the top and as many people at the bottom, because the people at the bottom are just less expensive staff from a team infrastructure perspective, right? Your team kind of looks like a triangle. 1 point at the top, 2 firm people on the base to keep that triangle balanced. And it brings down the cost structure of the team. So you can almost think of this as like a leverage ratio. How many support staff do you have for every lead advisor to leverage the advisor up? Because as we've said throughout, staff leverage is one of the single biggest productivity lifts for advisors more senior on the team. And so while all of these generate actually remarkably similar revenue per team member productivity, 1+2 teams have significantly more staff leverage than the others. Right? 1 advisor for every 2 support is much better than 3 advisors for every 2 support to generate the same revenue. 3 lead advisors are more expensive. And so when we look at it from revenue per team, we came to the same conclusion that we did around revenue per advisor, which is that lean triangle teams work quite well if we're simply trying to maximize productivity and output of the firm. Now, again, some of us are optimizing for other things. I want to optimize for time off. I want to get to a certain income level and then shift my time in the business. If you do that, you need more senior advisors. And so your team structure starts to look different. But as you can see from the chart here, both when we measure by revenue per team and the earlier revenue per advisor, 4-person teams actually have some of the lowest productivity of anyone that we can find quite consistently across our sample. And ultimately, we kind of attribute that to 2 things that start to emanate forth from larger team structures. The first is what I call the management tax. Simply put, if you're the senior advisor on a larger team, you have more people to manage. Quarterly reviews, annual performance reviews, maybe ideally one-on-one meetings that happen regularly, but actually usually not that often in a lot of advisory firms, because that's kind of the whole point. Management is often not the reason why we got into the business. Serving clients is the reason that we got into the business. Management is a little bit difficult for a lot of us, and when the teams get bigger, either you need to spend more time on management or you have more management issues because you're not spending the time on the management. And then at best, the team doesn't function as well, and at worst, you don't have as much time to serve clients because all the time you are freeing up by having a bigger team, you trade off for the fact that you have to do management meetings with all the people that you just hired. And so the bigger teams, this is part of why we find the bigger teams don't seem to actually get productivity lifts. You are freeing up some time with more people to delegate to, but you have to give it back in the time it takes to manage them. The second challenge that we find around larger teams is what I call the shared clients tax. When teams have multiple lead advisors, we tend to share the clients. For lots of good reasons, right? We want more than one person in the room. It's a higher touch service. It makes it easier for continuity if I'm sick or out on vacation. All of those things are true, but the fundamental grounding factor is if you put twice as many people in the room and the clients don't pay twice the fee, you're going to end up behind. I mean, that's just like the sad mathematical reality. Like if I can serve you on my own and I put a second advisor in the room the whole time, my advisor cost is twice as much, and if my clients are paying the same fees, I've just chopped the efficiency and revenue productivity of the firm in half. And very few of us who run multi-advisor teams actually charge different fees. At best, we serve more affluent clientele, and there does come a point where you're working with clients that are so high net worth that it really is quite cost efficient to put multiple people in the room. If you're working with deca-millionaires and all up and you want to have 2 or 3 people in every single client meeting, the math works just fine, because you're already at 20,000 revenue per client or more, which means even if you divide it by 2 or 3 people, the math is really good. But for most of us in the business that work with either mass affluent clients, a couple $100,000 up to $1 million, or I like to call them the mere millionaires, those poor souls who only have like $1, $2, $3 million in their net worth, the math gets really hard when we put multiple clients in meetings, because we're not actually charging fees commensurate with the cost structure it takes to have multiple leads in the meeting. Which again is why if we want someone else in the meeting, associate advisors in a support position works better, because at least their compensation cost structure is lower, and we still get to learn them and train them and develop them. If they do very well, they're going to spin off and make a new team. They don't expand my team, because now I have to manage them and hire a new associate advisor, and now I have twice as many people to manage, and now I have a management tax problem. You can still develop talent in lean triangle teams, but when they're ready to move up, they move up and out. They form a new team. They become the new anchor for the next 1+2 team that's going to come along, and the firm backfills the associate advisor role. That's what keeps the productivity and keeps the talent development cycle going. So now, curious, as we're getting this discussion, where everyone's head is now. So giving you one more option here to chime in around how you're feeling as you're taking all of this in. More team, fewer team, less team, different team. Lots of different choices now. All right, a lot of people feeling good for the right team. Awesome. And so, pretty good mix. Some of us are revisiting composition. Some of us need to add, and many of us are feeling good about the team structure that we've got. And again, part of why we find some structures are optimal to others is because we surveyed all of you, not literally all of you, although many of you did participate in our studies, so thank you very much. We do these every 6 months on an ongoing basis out to anywhere between about 500 and 1,000 advisors at a time, trying to make sure we really get broad industry-based data around how are we running our firms in practice. And so that's how we find both the dynamics of those of us who don't have enough team members, those of us who have too many, and those of us who maybe need to revisit the composition of the teams that we've got. So a couple of thoughts and takeaways here, and then I do want to leave some time for questions. Staff leverage becomes one of the biggest drivers to productivity that we can find. And we see this over and over again when we do our research. The other really big driving factor is how affluent the clients are that you're working with in the first place. Because simply put, people with more complex problems and more financial capability to pay for solutions to those problems tend to pay more and result in higher productivity for the advisor. Right? It's the same thing between being a lawyer that charges $1,000 an hour and a lawyer that charges $300 an hour. The lawyer charges $1,000 an hour is just more revenue productive because they're making more money from their time. But $1,000 an hour lawyers tend to only work with people who have a lot of money and a lot of complexity, because that's the only people who want to pay $1,000 an hour. Same thing applies in the advisor world. But then as we do that, staff leverage becomes the driver. Right? In the simplest sense, you can think of this as like the doctor-nurse model. Right? When doctors want to be more successful, they don't add other doctors into their practice. They add more nurse and support team around them so that they can optimize how much time they're spending with clients and letting go of the rest. And advisors benefit in the same way. Probably not quite to the extreme that doctors can have like 5, 6, 7 support staff for one doctor. But we benefit in the same way by having people to delegate to. And so you can think about staff leverage. How much support staff do I have per advisor who's operating in the practice? Now, you can also go too far on that, which means maybe you've just got too much overhead. But support structures around ratios like 1 to 2 show up very well in our research. Beware of shared clients. I know a lot of us do it for a lot of reasons. Some of them are good and are not necessarily about maximizing revenue. So again, I'm not trying to say this is the only way to run teams, but just be cognizant of the trade-offs that you're making. Most of us do not have clients that pay the fee that it actually takes to have 2 senior lead advisors in the room, unless you're really working with affluent clients who do. And so if you don't have the clients that pay at that level, you can decide to do it because it's an appealing trade-off, but recognize that it's a trade-off that you're making. Third, advisors are more productive when they get to be advisors and not managers. For a lot of us that are advisors and don't like managing, this is not exactly news. This is maybe more messaging up to senior leadership than individual advisors themselves, depending on what position you are in the firm. But one of the key benefits that we find for lean teams is it just either brings the management overhead down or allows for more centralized management support, so advisors can be advisors and don't have to be managers. When we get into multi-lead teams, simply put, if you're going to do this, have a goal and be clear about it. If it's revenue productivity, it's probably not ideal. We have a lot of trouble finding multi-lead advisor teams that are as revenue productive as the rest. If you're doing it because you want more time off, more power to you. If you're doing it because you're freeing up time to do business development, you're actually ready to do it, awesome. Clear your schedule, delegate more clients, go grow the business further. But at least be clear about why you're doing it, because otherwise we find most advisors that expand teams beyond 3 people with multiple lead advisors to delegate clients to just end out working fewer hours. So again, if that's your goal, awesome. If that was not your goal and you're a firm owner trying to leverage up your firm, a little less than ideal. And bear in mind that for some teams, this means it may even be more efficient to split the team than it is to keep the teams large. Our numbers suggest that even themes that are like 3+2, 3+3 structures that are out there would be better to actually split into a bunch of individual teams. Feels nice to work together, but they're not actually as productive because they're sharing a little bit too much, and there's too much overhead of the complexity of handing off all the things to 5 or 6 different people versus just saying, like, I got me and my 2 people, and we're a super tight communication loop. For those that are still in the earlier stage hiring up, hiring really does have an absolute, utterly massive lift. A lot of us I know go out there and we're like, I just wish that I could find the technology that would free up the time it takes to grow the business. And yes, there is some great tech out there that does it. We find a particularly high adoption rate for AI meeting notes tools among solo advisors that don't have anyone to delegate to do the meeting notes. They're like, cool, AI will help me do the meeting notes. It does help. They're great tools, but that's only one small iota of the things that you can delegate. You still end out with an absolutely massive lift when you start putting team around you. So to each their own about where they want to put those thresholds. We find most folks start pulling the trigger on the first hire somewhere between $200,000 to $300,000 of revenue. If you're south of that, you can do it, but it's tight, or maybe you'll do like a part-time fractional person and ramp them up further. If you're well over $300,000 of revenue and you haven't hired anyone on the team, you're almost certainly behind, unless you have like a very small number of very high-dollar clients that just don't take a lot of time. And then the associate advisor tends to show up when you kind of double that revenue again. So somewhere in about $500,000 to $800,000 range, depending on your revenue per client, you're getting somewhere up around 60 to 80 clients. If you've got 60, 80 clients that are like ongoing active, not just one-time transactional, 60, 80 ongoing active clients tends to start getting pretty busy. Just the amount of review meetings that are going on and the amount of prep and follow-up that you need to do with them, you start getting some very material leverage out of an associate advisor as well. And most of these positions, at the end of the day, when an advisor hires someone in the position for somewhere between $50,000 to $100,000 of staff salary plus bonus plus benefits, depending on where you are in cost of living, we end up getting a $200,000 to $300,000 lift in revenue productivity. So it's a very good ROI on investing in the staff. Obviously, it's one step back for two steps forward. They want the salary now, you get the client revenue later. But we very consistently see one step back for 2 to 3 steps forward at the end of the day in the investments into staff that you get. But the driving factor for all of this, because staff leverage is so crucial for productivity of advisory firms, what it indirectly means is that we have to make sure we get a certain level of revenue per client, or it's really hard to do this. We end up capping out where we run out of time because we have so many clients before we get to the point where we've got enough money to hire a person. Too many clients, too few dollars, not enough to reinvest in the staff, puts a lot of us into a trap. And that number will vary a little bit depending on practice and what you do, but for most of us that have ongoing serve clients and build relationships with them, we find it gets really hard to scale advisory firms with less than $3,000 of revenue per client. It's just kind of a rough magic number. A lot of us start, particularly if we're pure solos, start to really cap out around 90 to 100 clients if you don't have anyone to delegate anything to. 100 clients at $3,000 of revenue per client is $300,000 of gross revenue. If you can't get to $300,000 of gross revenue before you hit your absolute max, you get stuck where you can't afford to hire the staff to get you to the next level, and you just end up with a stuck ceiling, which is why the pure solos that you saw all ended up capping out at a third of the income of those that have some kind of team structure around them. So it's a hard conversation for some of us to say maybe there's some clients that are taking up seats on the bus that are preventing my ability to grow to the business to the next level, but that is a financial reality in the business. It means even if you really want to serve clients who maybe can't afford the services, get 80 clients who pay $4,000 and then take 20 pro bono clients. Works much better than trying to serve everyone we can and getting the revenue per client so low that we can't afford to reinvest to scale up. So I hope this is helpful as some food for thought around productivity. Happy to hang out for questions a bit. If you want some of the research itself, we are actually putting out today in conjunction with Future Proof, and my thanks to Matt Middleton and team. So you can get a copy here. We actually have a couple of printed ones for anyone who likes the physical printed book version. We write long research. It's like a book, but it's easy to leaf through. It's got lots of pictures. We've got some physical copies here as well, and I'm happy to take questions as time permits. Yes, Scott? Ooh, good question. So is there an optimum number of clients per advisor and then hours per year per client? So I'd kind of answer this two ways. The first, when we look just in practice where numbers typically show up, a lot of this depends on the affluence of the clients in the first place. So firms that work with very high dollar clients will see numbers of 50, 40, 30 clients per advisor. Those of us who work with the mere millionaire types, we often see people capping out somewhere in the 80 to 120 clients per advisor with some team structure around them. Solos are lower. If I work in the higher volume mass affluent space, I've just got a bunch of retirees, they have $300,000, I go see them once a year, we do our thing, manage their portfolio and rebalance, we'll see client loads that get up to about 200. Part of the reason why we look at revenue per instead, though, is because it kind of becomes the ultimate equalizer. So the other way that we look at this overall, and getting the second part of the question around hours per, varies to some extent by firm, but we find this actually tends to hold pretty well by revenue per in the first place. Firms that are working with the mass affluent usually end up with something in the neighborhood of about 12 to 15 hours per year per client that the service team is providing to them. Meetings, prep, in between, investment research that we still do, portfolio management and trading, the end of year tax loss harvesting, if you just bundle all the different stuff together. Now, not coincidentally, if I'm spending 12 hours per client and it's $3,000 of revenue per client, I'm basically making about $250 an hour, which ends out kind of being the baseline threshold. It's also hard to scale an advisory firm below $250 per hour. When firms start to scale up, we find the math and metrics are remarkably similar in those ratios. The biggest driver for what just defines higher revenue productive teams is they command more dollars per hour. If I just take your revenue and I define by how many hours you work, roughly $1,300 is a good baseline number. About 2,000 working hours in a year, 40 hours a week times 50 weeks a year. Most of us in practice, only about 2/3 of the time ends out being on clients. The other 1/3 is compliance, management, professional development, the occasional vacation, all the other stuff that goes into it. So 2/3 of our time is about 1,300 or 1,400 hours a year. If you divide $1,300 to $1,400 hours into your revenue, you can get an hour per advisor that gets served. And really what we find is firms tend to lift up their productivity when they command more dollars per hour. And notably, you can't get more dollars per hour with tech, right? If I can do all the work for you in 1 hour instead of 2 from the client end, I'm like, then why am I paying you for 2 hours? I only expect to pay you for 1. Like, congratulations on being more efficient. Now, if you want to make twice as much money, go find another client. I'm not like footing the bill. Now, in the interim, most of us don't bill by the hour, so it doesn't quite show up that way. But you still get it very indirectly, where someone out there is saying, I've got 100 of these clients, I work with them really, really hard, and someone else says, like, yeah, I have 200 clients, I just show up half as often for them, and I hope they don't notice, because I've got all this tech, I don't have to do that much work for them. Well, eventually, the other firm says, well, I'm going to do the same tech, and then I'm going to take all the hours that were freed up, and instead of doing half as much work for twice as many clients, I'm going to do twice as much work for that client, because I'm going to take the 2 hours that I freed up and do more services and provide more things, and then they end up out serving the clients and winning them away from the competition. So firms that reinvest their time savings into clients tend to do better. The firms that just say, like, yay, I got time savings, we can do less for each client and try to get more of them. I call it the shrinkflation effect. It's like, I'm actually doing less for you and charging you the same AUM fee and hoping you don't notice. And that works in the short term, but not the long term. Yes, sir. Good question. So the question was, like, our things like the 1+2 was around shared staff, or it was around sort of dedicated staff. What do we see around shared staff structures? I'll say mixed from what we see. Now, I have to split up a little bit, because there's a couple of different ways that we can do shared staff centralization models, right? There's centralized ops support, right? Like, instead of having a dedicated client service manager, we have like 10 people in a team with a ticketing system that manages to it. We didn't drill down to that level to specifically measure like dedicated team versus centralized service ops team, beyond saying, do you have centralized team support in general? And we found that firms that had centralized team support were essentially about the same as everybody else. We didn't find them materially better. We didn't find them materially worse. They were technically like a tiny, tiny bit worse, but within normal margin of error of just statistical noise. When we looked at firms that have more centralized support around higher level functions, it shows up a little bit different. Centralized investment management support works really, really well. Like firms that centralize investments into models, have advisors do standard models, get the investment research function off the investment team and centralize, just get very big lifts. Usually the biggest constraint there is whether the advisors are willing to adopt consistent models across the firm, but that's a people management issue. The operational efficiency is there. Centralized planning teams seem to show up a little bit more mixed. On paper, it's very appealing, get more of the financial planning stuff off the advisor. In practice, it gets harder, and we find kind of for two reasons. One, if I'm not careful, the time I gain by getting the planning work off the team, I take back, and how much I have to review and have additional communication back and forth to make sure that the plan's actually done appropriately for the client with a person who was not in the room with the client and has no idea what the situation was. And you can do that, but we're not seeing significant lifts out of that. It's just kind of like you're sort of trading one set of operational challenges for another. We do see some tendency for more productive firms, though, to centralize, I'll call it the stuff that comes up less often. So not like I want to centralize the financial plan construction, but we've got a centralized expert to help with the advanced estate planning cases. We've got a centralized expert to handle all the insurance stuff, because most of the advisors don't do that much insurance, or we don't even write that here anymore, but someone needs to be able to talk the talk about detailed insurance products and do the analyses, so we have a centralized person there. So think more like centralized advanced expertise than centralized operational. Or like centralized plan construction. The plan construction part we find just, we want to treat it kind of like a factory machine, where it's just like, people do the steps in the machine, put the parts on and hand it off like the Ford construction line. But in practice, there's enough that's client specific that we're not seeing big lifts from teams that centralize that, which just having lived that role, like I think a part of it is the amount of back and forth that it takes to make sure that the plan is done well. And frankly, the deeper the planning firm, the harder it is to centralize that function. But the deeper the planning firm, the more affluent the clients, which is normally a productivity lift. So you get this tension where the best way to lift the productivity is to work with more complex clients that have more complex planning needs. And the more complex the clients and the planning needs, the more challenging it sometimes becomes to centralize the planning function.
Michael.
So with that, I'm seeing we are out of time.
Yeah.
The hook has come.
You're going to stick around, though, right?
Yeah, I will stick around. I'm happy to take questions if people want to hang around for more.
So Michael's going to be around. Obviously, the report.
Yep. The reports are popular.
They
so
went.
We'll bring more next time.
Amazing. If you are participating in breakthrough meetings, the pavilion to the far right is going to be starting in about 5 minutes now. Make your way there. We'll be back here in about an hour or so to kick off more content. Thank you. Give it up for Michael Kitces.
Thank you.